It screws the ecosystem, especially nascent ones, because then people don't trust. And the fact of the matter is that most startups fail. If you want another shot at it, if you think this is the career you want, then you need to play nice and you need to uphold the principles of being a good ecosystem participant. But these sort of bad blowups or fraud cases are really bad for the ecosystem.
Welcome to Brave. Learn from Southeast Asia's best tech leaders. Build the future, learn from our past, and stay human in between. No BS on success. I'm Jeremy Au, venture capitalist, serial founder, Harvard MBA, science fiction nerd, and dad of 2 daughters. Every week, we debate startup news, interview changemakers, answer listener questions, and share personal insights. Join our movement of over 40,000 members and get transcripts, resources, and community at www.bravesea.com. Stay well and stay brave. Did you know that you can get a free business class trip to Japan every year with HeyMax AI? HeyMax is a rewards app where 500 brands like Apple, Shopee, Amazon, Agoda, and even banks reward you for your loyalty by contributing towards your dream vacation. Through the HeyMax app, every transaction you make earns you Max Miles, which you can redeem for free travel at more than 25 airline and hotel partners. Sign up at heymax.ai now to get a 1,000 Max Miles head start. Turn your daily transactions into dream vacations. Your business can also leverage the highly cost-efficient and desirable loyalty currency called Max Miles that has no expiry, no fees, and instantly one-to-one transferable to 24 airlines and hotels to acquire new customers and drive repeat sales with no integration required. Reach out to Joe at heymax.ai and mention Brave to uplevel your rewards game and reduce your cost. Hey, morning, Shiyan.
Morning, Jeremy. How's it going?
Good. How's life for you?
It's good. I'm in a suburb of Shanghai while my kids do Chinese immersion, so it's fantastic.
Oh, I feel like I got to go do that eventually one day. My wife has been saying that, it would be the fastest way for my kids to learn is just go through like 100% language immersion, right?
I totally believe it. So I think our goal was to really get them talking
Yeah.
more and listening, and there's just no way to avoid it. And Chinese kids this age don't learn English, so there's no one at school to speak English to them. And I think they're just getting a lot more reps, and it's less an academic subject and more sort of a living language, which was the objective of having them come here during their school holidays.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, I did a Chinese language immersion program at Tsinghua University after national service and before university for a semester. And I think it was a lot of fun. Actually learned a lot of Chinese, but like you said, everybody was kind of like wanting to speak English with me at that point of time. So I didn't get a full immersion program. And there's a lot of other students who were also learning Chinese and history and art. I mean, I was in like the most advanced class, but still, I think it would be better if I'd done this earlier rather than as a teenager.
I actually think the 5-year-old is getting more than the 7-year-old.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So the 5-year-old, for him, it's just totally normal playing. The 7-year-old actually has to do homework, so she feels a little bit more tortured, I guess. But the 5-year-old, you can see he's maybe, I don't know, even at that age, his brain is even more plastic. And so he's just picking up stuff. And the teachers are pretty pleased, I guess, with how fluent he sounds.
Yeah, I actually agree with you about that because I was like thinking about language immersion and putting money for that. And I was like, I think my parents spent quite a bit on me learning Chinese when I was older. And I was like, you know what? Better to spend it when they're like most receptive and the brains are most plastic. You're probably gonna save more money over the long term by doing it at early, and it's fun, like you said, rather than later. And then I was just like going to some tuition center or a Chinese teacher and being very sullen and resentful about it. So I was like, you know what? Just do it early.
Yeah, I think when you first have a kid, you think, "Oh, I'll speak a different language to them." And basically, you're not really prepared for the amount of effort it requires. Like,
Yeah.
it is, like, a lot of consistent effort, and it isn't like, the standard of Chinese we have in Singapore is actually not that high. So, I went to
Yeah.
the bookstore to flip through the books to see, and I was like, "Oh my god, like, my kid can't read this." There's, like, a major gap between her English reading ability and her Chinese reading ability, and that only compounds because then she only wants to read in English because she can read more stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's you've put in all this, like, remedial effort to get the Chinese up to the same level so she can actually read for pleasure.
Yeah.
Otherwise, like, you constantly have this gap. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, start early, Jeremy.
Yeah, I guess the good part about learning all this Chinese is we have all this influx of Chinese famous people coming to Singapore. So when we talk about famous people, I think we
Famous
recently had
or
two.
or infamous.
Yeah, infamous. So criminals. So we recently had a $3 billion of fraud or syndicate capital from the Chinese people across 10 individuals. I think a court case has recently come out. So good time to comment about them. So they're out buying properties. And what's interesting, of course, was that between the 10 of them, they had 5 family offices in Singapore. And there's another article as well, but it's also talking about how there's actually quite a bit of fraud in the family office scene. And so the Singapore and Hong Kong authorities are starting to tighten their disclosure requirements and reporting requirements to improve KYC and do that. And then I think there's another one, which was a botnet, the founder that was arrested as well.
I mean, I think first of all, the word family office is a bit nebulous. Like, what exactly is a family office? It is a tax advantaged box to put assets in. Like, what is it exactly? And I think it gives a vague air of, oh, these are some fancy people or something. But essentially, I think if you look at some of the regulations that some of these family offices were set up over, they were basically tax advantage schemes to bring capital into the island. And a lot of people took advantage of that. And they were, I think at the beginning, there was no minimum AUM bar. They've increased that over the last couple of years to try to raise the bar on what those things are. But the fake family office thing, I think, is like sort of hilarious in that it seems like a really elaborate way to go to free conferences and chat with people. But at the end of the day, if you don't have any money to invest, what is the point of it? And yeah, it's kind of like a confusing sort of like fraud. I think in the case of the money laundering scheme, the family office is sort of like a badge of, hey, I'm real. Don't question the source of my funds type of thing. But at least in the fake family office article, I was like, I don't really understand what the point is of these sort of fake FOs. Jeremy, you might have encountered one of these frauds earlier. Do you care to share?
Well, I think I'll talk about it more broadly, I guess. I think the tricky part is that on average, and where I agree with a lot of the assessment out there, is that traditionally family offices are pretty private, right? So they are private general. So there's not necessarily a huge amount of online presence like LinkedIn, etc. necessarily. I think maybe there's a little bit more clear for the investment professionals that are representing the family office. And a lot of these conversations as well also happen on a referral basis. So if somebody says, hey, you should chat with this person, then you're going to be like, okay, why not? And so I think it's actually quite easy once you kind of like enter a high trust environment that's very referral oriented, then it takes a while for kind of like the reference checks to catch up in that sense because, you get referred in pretty fast. I mean, the good news is that I think at these circles, because everybody is all WhatsApping each other, like it does catch up pretty fast and the chain of like question marks kind of moves pretty quickly as well. It's just that it's not an official like out and about. And also, I don't think there's a really big name on shame culture. So there's not much penalty as well. It's just more like, okay, I told you this. Now, and then you tell the people that you referred this person to about this concern, and then you move on with life. So I think that's the crux of it.
Sorry to put you on the spot, Jeremy.
I think what I realized is that those movies like Catch Me If You Can, which is about fraud and con and so forth, what they're really counting on is that if you have all of the signals of the success, signaling that you have the accreditation, the network, visibility of your wealth, then those things become obvious, right? And I think it's also interesting to see the networks also catch up and learn quickly. So I've learned that you have to watch out for certain signals in that sense. So what I mean by that is I think there are a lot of signals that make sense that say, hey, this person actually did what they did. For example, if they have a LinkedIn profile that worked at companies that your friends have worked at, it's pretty hard for somebody to fake that because, people will know that they worked with you, for example. Right now, obviously, they may slant it or change their experience somewhat. But in general, those are kind of like harder signals. And when you have the absence of a signal, doesn't mean that it's bad, but it just means that you have to be aware. But you can't take the absence of a signal to be okay. And I think that's my key learning. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally, totally. It was funny. I was talking to another investor and he was telling me about a deal he was looking at. And he said, you know what's really weird? I only have one mutual connection with this person, and it is the person who introduced us. And he's like, don't you think that's odd? And I was like, so I was asking questions. What's the context? Oh, are you like generationally separated? Are you, because then
Yeah.
there's like less overlap, or which networks would you believe overlapped? And he had gone to the same school as the person whose company he was evaluating, but this person was younger, right? You could sort of make some sort of plausible case, but it kind of lived in the same geography. And so he was kind of like, yeah, it just seems really strange. And then I was like, you should check if they actually went to that school. The claim is that they went to the school, but you should check if they actually went to that school because we've actually seen a case like this before where someone claimed to have attended a school, but then said some weird things and we were kind of like, oh, that sounds kind of fishy. And then we actually like went and asked the school whether this person had matriculated. And they were like, we actually have no record of this person. And so this other investor was like, oh my God, I had never even considered that someone would lie about this. I'm gonna go home and check this immediately. So I think it's like a point well taken, right? Which is like in the absence of signal, probably increased vigilance,
Yeah.
perhaps in initial interactions.
And I think there are also some signals that also have a higher correlation. So, for example, geography or like kind of like what kind of ecosystem they came from as well. We've looked at deals before, and I think, for example, accounting standards and fraud is like question mark, question mark, question mark. And what I've noticed was like I sat down and I started noticing a pattern where we're like, if you have experiences at certain companies, you tend to recognize your accounting rules in a certain way that tends to be very inflationary or positive to your GMV or your top line numbers, right? But it doesn't really show what your actual revenue or your actual profitability is. And I think there's some of the legacy, obviously, of the zero interest rate. Everybody had what community adjusted EBITDA and all these like fake terms for accounting. But yeah, I think a lot of people actually had that same was what lineage or learning from their alumni experiences in companies that had that accounting. And so for me, it was like very much, okay, this is a pattern. Was like, if they worked at this company or similar company, you have to watch out for this type of accounting, and we need to reconstruct the P&L to figure out the true profitability of the business. So that's something I've often had to do. And then the adjacent one would be like, if you're working in marketplaces or some kind of like low price kind of goods, services, then you actually have to do more due diligence because it has more shenanigans that can happen either through like channel stuffing or pushing distributors. There's a bunch of stuff that can really have to be fixed. Whereas I think a SaaS company is a lot easier to do your due DD because it's 10 clients giving you $1,000 a year. It's actually a very different set of audit requirements.
Yeah, taken.
Any bad actors or fraud that you've seen in your line of work? I'm sure you must have seen a few startups or due diligence.
Yeah, I think it's rare to see like outright fraud. I think there are people who are loosey goosey on definitions. As you said, what is GMV? What is gross? What is net? I think people sometimes get cute with that. In general, I think it's probably more naivete or incompetence that leads to bad numbers or controls. But yeah, I mean, I think it was funny. I was talking to a founder, an older guy, late 30s, who was quite experienced, but was his first company he had founded, and we're kind of talking through his learnings, and he said, in retrospect, it seems insane to me that anyone would give a 25-year-old $2 million and say good luck. He's like, I'm 38, I've managed like hundreds of people, and I find founding challenging, right? There's so much complexity to getting a company up and running, and he's like, it's crazy that we trust people and that actually many of them pull it off. And so I was thinking about that because what are the conditions that enable that to work is that those 25-year-olds are actually surrounded by lots of people who've done it before who can help them kind of level up quickly. And there is a ecosystem expectation about how they're going to behave. Because if they don't comport themselves in a sort of above board manner, then it'll be hard for them to raise again, right? Like they can't kind of come back around. Whereas I think that's less true in more nascent ecosystems where you could be like, oh, this is great. These people just gave me this money with not a lot of oversight and I can run off with it because they don't really think there's no sort of like societal pressure, right?
Yeah, law and order or rule of law that makes it easy to claw back the money or to prosecute. And we've seen that actually in Southeast Asia, right? We've had multiple instances of founders running away or key executives running away with capital that was earmarked for the company, which is horrible. But it does happen, right? And it does happen actually in the US as well, right? I think there was this case, I can't remember, we'll pull out, but there was this female founder. She was Forbes 30 under 30. She sold a company in M&A to a bank, and then a lot
JP
of
Morgan.
activity. JP Morgan, yeah. I can't remember the exact name, but there was a lot of fraud basically with the user accounts that were done, right?
Yeah. She's getting sued though, I think.
Yeah, I think it's catching up.
It's not consequence free.
Yeah, so it's always kind of mind-boggling because I'm kind of like, if you do this in America as JP Morgan, you're gonna get caught eventually. I kind of makes more sense when you're the country with less law and order. Because you're going to be like, and your counterparty is maybe less sophisticated, then you'll be like, oh, I have a higher
You
chance of
should
getting
not.
away with it.
No, no, no. Jeremy, we are not endorsing this. Why are you saying this?
I didn't say I'm endorsing it. I am pro law and order And I think my legalism from China, I guess philosophy is showing through, which is that law, justice, and I think the sense of right and wrong has to be backed up by the use of force. And if you think that you can get away with it, then more people would try to get away with it. People shouldn't do it. I'll make it official. Jeremy declares that you should not conduct fraud of any type. How about that? That's my clear stance.
Well, I
I'm
think
just
it
saying that,
screws
yeah,
I
yeah,
think it yeah,
yeah,
and it screws the ecosystem, right? Like,
definitely.
it screws the ecosystem, especially nascent ones, because then people are like, "I don't trust." And the fact of the matter is that most startups fail. If you want another shot at it, if you think this is the career you want, then you need to play nice and you need to, like, uphold kind of the principles of being a good ecosystem participant. But these sort of, like, bad blow-ups or fraud cases are really bad for the ecosystem.
Ah, okay. We've been ranting about the botnet founder being arrested in Singapore and everything. So with the recent announce of the Apple AI, I guess they called it Apple Intelligence. So
Apple
also
Intelligence.
AI. I know they try to claim artificial intelligence into Apple Intelligence. So they announced it. So maybe AI is gonna save us, right?
Isn't that the answer we've all been assuming anyway?
The Church of Apple
No, I mean,
Intelligence.
WWDC on Monday, is the long-awaited Apple announcement on what they're actually doing in AI because it kind of felt like they were a little bit behind Microsoft and Google on that front. But I think the interesting thing is that Apple just has a ton of consumer distribution. And if they choose to put AI into their devices, they have a real shot at actually driving a ton of adoption. And I think they know a lot about you, right? They've got your calendar, they've got your email, they've got your iMessage. They know who you're calling, your contact, your address book, and sort of the promise of being able to connect all those things together and do it in a possibly less creepy way. I think that's what they're trying to sell, right? Apple's focus on privacy, that they're able to do it on device instead of in the cloud, that even Apple themselves can't do it. So I think it was pretty interesting, right? Like, I think each of the giants has their own claim to distribution prowess, right? So Microsoft through its Office suite, Google through its search and email products, and then of course Apple is kind of like the center of like you carrying its device around with you 24/7. And so I think it's super interesting. I think there's a question in my mind, are they going to extend that to third-party apps as well? I have an iPhone, but I don't use iMessage really. My life lives on WhatsApp. I use Gmail. I don't use Apple's email client. And what will they be able to do for me as someone who uses a bunch of third-party services and would like to leverage the intelligence? But I think there's a whole question on sort of like how the data flows between third-party apps and the Apple sort of intelligence system. But it's still early. Those are still demos. None of this stuff is live. So I am pretty curious about it.
I think it makes sense on several dimensions. And I would say that my reaction to you, and I have no idea, have no private information or whatever it is. So it's my speculation. It's just that I think if you're an AI that's in your pocket and you already have the iOS Apple Store of all these apps and everything, which is a walled garden, then AI is a huge centrifugal force to pull everything together, right? And so you want to have that opt-in ability for, obviously it's a two-way opt-in, right? The app developer has to agree, and obviously the user has to agree as well. But I think you can imagine that exerting that gravity onto the ecosystem, right? And it helps. And so while it's under attack for the walled garden, etc., this is another feature that will help increase the value of the Apple ecosystem. Because if you're using a Windows laptop, but you're working with Gmail, which is Google, there's always that problem that you can't make it synchronized, etc. So I think Apple's just going to try to pull everything together.
And I do think it's kind of funny, some of the features are like a Genmoji. I'm unhappy with the emojis available to me, and now I can generate my own emojis. I was like, okay, I'm not sure the value of that to me, but it's like an amusing implementation.
You never know. You never know. It might become the hottest feature amongst Generation Alpha.
I mean, probably.
Yeah.
Although I feel like the benefit of emojis is that they represent stuff, right? And so if you're all generating your own emoji, like, how do I know that I'm interpreting your emoji correctly?
A hot take is that in 100 years, you're going to be horribly wrong on this one. I bet that all those future people are going to be like, what? You use boring ass, like 10 or 20 emojis. My hot take is like every emoji will be highly personalized, but with the cross check that one, time to come, I guess. One interesting part about debates is that I think Twitter is kind of like having this debate, which is this is a horrible deal for Apple. You're giving root access to ChatGPT. You're feeding all this data. Apple has done a horrible deal. And the other side is, oh, ChatGPT has gone through a horrible deal. You've been like neutered and castrated and put in a little box because a user using Apple Intelligence on Apple device would like first go through either through their on-device AI model, then an Apple Cloud AI model,
And then lastly, if they want to, they can go into a ChatGPT premium tier. There's some level of free access, but can be upgraded to a premium level. So where do you fall in this debate, Shiyan?
I mean, I think a good deal is where everyone feels a little bit sad. So is like the right level of negotiation or whatever. But I mean, I think if I'm OpenAI, would I rather that Anthropic got into the box or Llama
Yeah.
or any others?
Yeah.
No, I would rather that I was the one in the box. If they were gonna pick one box and one person got to be in the box, who wants to be there? So I think from that perspective, if it's gonna be anyone that isn't just Apple's in-house system, then I think it's the best they can do. And then I think from the Apple perspective, they knew they were behind. They knew that their in-house capability wasn't like up to what is like the required standard, which is what everyone's used to with ChatGPT. So they need to provide some option, right? But alongside, they're gonna try to accelerate their development as fast as possible to try to catch up and to try to uniquely leverage the assets that they have to build a better consumer experience, right? Given everything that they know and their control of the hardware, they should be able to do a better job than out of the box ChatGPT that has no context and no additional data feeds, right? I mean, I think that's kind of the bet. This is the first inning, right? They're still trying to figure out what it is. But I don't think this is the same as like the Google search bar deal where they're paying Apple $20 billion in order to just be the Safari search bar. Because it's like Google wasn't going to play in search anyway. They were not trying to catch up. That was just like a piece of real estate. And for Google, like it's hugely valuable to own that traffic ahead of Bing or anybody else. And yeah, I think we're going to, jury's out. We'll see what happens. But I think this is like the best deal they could do for each of them at this point in time, given what they know.
I think it's interesting to talk about the Google deal as well, because Google didn't do it for maps. So Google built out Apple Maps slow and steady over a long period of time. And Google Maps is an independent. The interesting dynamic is that there was a partnership on search, but not a partnership on the map side, which is two different products, obviously, but between the same companies.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Apple must have felt like there was some advantage to having their own Maps product that was like more achievable than trying to build their own search product, perhaps. I don't feel like I have a great perspective on that. Maybe because they thought they were going to build a car, although that got
That
killed.
is true. Yeah, that got killed. You know what? I think you're right. If I was to speculate, but that was probably one of the step-by-step decisions that he probably had.
Yeah. But now I'm in China. Google Maps doesn't work very well. I'm
What are you using now?
Baidu Maps.
Yeah. How's it?
It's slow going because my Chinese reading is really bad. I often try to look something up on Google Maps and then I try to like triangulate back through to it. But Didi, actually, you can translate locations into English on Didi. So that actually is often better than using the raw maps product.
So on that note, maybe we need to put Shiyan and Jeremy into the Chinese language immersion program.
Oh my God. Yeah. No, I definitely need it. I'm so like, even just ordering, I mean, this is terrible. I wanted to order an oat milk latte and I
Don't ask
realized I
me.
didn't know how to say oat milk. And so
Uh-oh.
then I had to be like, do you have milk that is not from cows? The guy just stared at me like, and then he's like, Yen Mai. And then I looked at him and I was like, hmm? And then he like went and reached into the fridge and like brought out the oat milk. And I was like, yeah, that thing. Oh no, I learned how to say oat milk latte. It's Yen Mai, not here, which I now order every day. But it was really embarrassing. I was like, do you have milk that's not from cow?
That's so funny.
It's real
On
bad.
that note, let's wrap up this episode. See you, Shiyan.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Brave. If you enjoyed this episode, please share the podcast with your friends and colleagues. We would also appreciate you leaving a rating or review. Head over to www.bravesea.com for member content, resources, and community. Stay well and stay brave.